I never imagined that the day my daughter walked down the aisle, glowing, trembling with excitement, clutching a bouquet I had arranged petal by petal, would also be the day I faced the man who destroyed my life. Her groom, my enemy, the one man I swore I would never forgive. But fate is a cruel architect. It builds bridges where we swear we've burned them, and it forces us to cross them barefoot. The morning of the wedding began quietly, deceptively peaceful. Soft sunlight slipped through the curtains, brushing against the floorboards of my old house like gentle fingers. I stood by the window with a cup of tea. I never actually drank, watching the breeze move through the trees. Normally, I would be humming, planning, fussing over little details. But that day, my heartbeat didn't match the rhythm of celebration. It echoed something else, a warning, a memory, a name, Lucas Grant. My daughter, Isabella, my bright, stubborn, trusting girl, had fallen in love with him. The son of the man who had stolen everything from me years ago. The family responsible for my husband's downfall, for the lawsuit that left us in ruins, for the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering how I would feed a child on a single income. The Grants had crushed us, and Lucas was their golden heir, and now he was going to be my son-in-law. I had tried to stop it. I had begged Isabella to think, to look deeper, to question the fairy tale she believed she was living in. But she only smiled at me with that soft, stubborn innocence I could never break. "Mom," she had whispered once, touching my cheek, "is not his father. Love doesn't always follow bloodlines." She believed that. She believed in him. And because I loved her more than I hated him, I stayed silent. But inside me, a war raged that no one could see. When the morning drew closer to noon, cars began lining the driveway. Laughter filled the house, friends, cousins, the bustle of makeup brushes and mascara wands. Isabella sat in the center of it all, radiant in her dress, surrounded by tulle and sparkle and hope. She looked like a dream I had raised with my bare hands. I paused in the doorway, letting myself take her in fully. Every curl, every freckle, every tremor of excitement in her breath. And when she turned and saw me, her smile could have lit the entire world. "Mom," she whispered, lifting her skirt, "come help me with the heel. I can't reach it." I knelt before her, the silk brushing my arms, and fastened the small pearl clasp around her ankle. She giggled nervously. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. I nodded, just thinking about Dad. My throat tightened. She always knew. "Yes," I whispered. "He would have been proud of you." She placed her hand over mine. "You're proud too, right?" That question carved straight into my chest. "I'm proud of you," I said honestly. "More than anything." And I meant it, even if my heart trembled with fear about the man she was marrying. Hours later, the venue buzzed with ceremony. Guests filled their seats, the orchestra strings began their slow build, and petals lined the aisle in soft, perfect rows. The air smelled of roses and anticipation. I took my place near the front, fingers intertwined tightly in my lap. And then the doors opened. Isabella stepped through like a miracle in lace. Everyone rose. And beside the altar, Lucas turned. His smile widened when he saw her. But when his gaze flicked to me, just for a fraction of a second, I saw something colder. Recognition. Memory. A spark of the same bloodline that had once crushed mine. He hid it quickly under charm, but not quickly enough. My stomach knotted. My heart hardened. My lungs tightened like a fist around them. This wedding wasn't uniting two families. It was tying together a daughter's heart with a mother's wound. When the ceremony ended, and applause thundered through the hall. People moved toward the reception in waves of excitement. But I stayed seated for a moment, letting the noise fade into background blur. I had one last task left. My wedding gift. A gift that wasn't wrapped in ribbons or bows. A gift that wasn't sweet or sentimental. A gift that carried truth like a blade wrapped in velvet. I rose from my seat, clutching the envelope in my hand, the one I had prepared for months. Inside it was the end of the war, not with violence, not with revenge, but with justice. I walked toward the bridal table as people mingled and waiters floated between them with trays of champagne. Isabella saw me first, her face blooming into soft warmth. "Mom, did you bring the gift? You said we couldn't open it until after the ceremony?" "Yes," I said, placing it gently before her. "It's time." Lucas turned, curiosity sharpening his eyes. His posture stiffened ever so slightly when he saw the envelope. Maybe he felt it too, the shift in the air, the tightening of the stage, the quiet before truth walks in wearing heavy boots. Isabella looked between us. "Is everything okay?" I touched her cheek. "It will be," I whispered, "after you read this." She slid a finger beneath the flap. Lucas leaned closer, trying to mask the tension in his jaw. My heartbeat slowed. My pulse steadied. Years of fear, anger, silence, all gathering behind this moment. My daughter had married my enemy. But now she would know why. And the truth I placed in her hands would decide everything that happened next for her, for him, for us, for the war that began long before this wedding and would end with my gift. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope, the paper whispering against itself in that delicate way that always announces something important. Around us, the clinking of glasses and the murmur of guests blurred into a distant buzz, like the world had stepped back a few feet to give us space. Inside the envelope was not jewelry, not a letter, not money. It was a file, thin but heavy with the weight of what it carried. Isabella frowned as she slid the pages out, a copy of a contract, a few bank statements, and a letter written in my handwriting. Her eyes flicked between my face and the documents, confusion tightening her brow. "Mum, what is this?" The air thickened. I could feel Lucas watching me quietly, alert, tension coiled beneath the surface of his polished exterior. "It's the truth," I said softly. "The part of my life you never knew." Her fingers tightened around the pages. "About what?" "About your father, about me, and about the Grants." At the mention of his last name, Lucas's jaw clenched. His wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. His eyes darted to the top page, and I could see, in that subtle flicker, that he recognized it. He'd seen these documents before. "Maybe this isn't the best time," he said quickly, forcing a chuckle. "We can go through this later. It's our wedding day, Bella. We should be celebrating, not..." "No," I interrupted quietly. "You've had years of silence in your favor. I've had years of swallowing this. Today belongs to her, and she deserves to know who she just married." Isabella's breath hitched. "Married? My enemy?" I added, letting the words land. Her eyes widened. "Enemy? Mom, what are you talking about?" My hands trembled, but I didn't look away. "Do you remember when you were 8 and suddenly we had to move out of the big house?" I began. "When Daddy stopped going to the office and started working odd jobs. When I'd tell you it was an adventure, but every night I'd cry in the kitchen when you couldn't see me." Her eyes softened with distant recognition. "I remember you kept saying everything was fine, but you were always tired. And Dad, he looked sad all the time." "I lied to you," I said. voice cracking. I told you it was just the economy. Bad luck. A mistake on a deal, but it wasn't bad luck. I glanced at Lucas. It was your father's partner, silence stabbed between us. Isabella slowly lowered her gaze to the first page in her hand. A business partnership contract. 2 names at the bottom. One of them belonged to her father, the other to a familiar last name. Grant, she whispered, reading it aloud. Richard Grant. Her lips parted. Lucas. Isn't that? My father. He finished quietly. The edges of my control frayed. Your father convinced mine to sign everything over under the promise of a merger. He stripped our assets. He walked away with your father's life's work. Your father died broken, and the world thought he'd been reckless, irresponsible, a failure. My voice cracked. He wasn't. Isabella stared at the papers with growing horror. How do you know? She whispered. How can you be sure? I nodded toward the next pages. Go on. Her trembling hands shuffled the stack. Bank transfers, hidden accounts, timelines. Those are your father's emails. I said, the ones I recovered years later with the help of someone who actually believed me. Someone who taught me how to dig for truth instead of swallowing lies. Who? She asked faintly. Someone I'll introduce you to, I said, if you want. I watched as her eyes dragged across the lines, her father asking questions, hesitating to sign. The replies, the pressure, the reassurance, the threats implied between carefully chosen words. And then the last email, the one he never responded to, because by then it was already too late. The deal had gone through. The trap had closed. My husband lost everything. Richard Grant walked away richer, and our family's reputation went up in smoke. Isabella slowly lowered the pages. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because you were a child, I whispered, and because for a long time I didn't have proof, just my gut. And when I finally did, you were already in love with him. Her gaze flickered to Lucas, as if seeing him for the first time, not in a suit, not as her groom, but as the son of the man who had destroyed her childhood home. Lucas shifted in his seat. Bella, he said softly, reaching for her hand, this is old business. It has nothing to do with us. My father did what he thought. I cut him off with a look. Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare minimize what he did. Isabella's eyes darted between us. Is it true? She asked Lucas quietly. Did your father really ruin my dad? His jaw ticked, but his voice stayed even. My father made a business deal. Her husband wasn't careful. It went bad. That's not the same as ruining someone. People lose in business all the time. It's tragic, but it's not a crime. That's not what those papers say, I replied. There are forged signatures, backdated amendments, side accounts. Money routed right before your father filed the merger paperwork. I exhaled, feeling years of bitterness knot in my chest. I spent a decade trying to prove your father wasn't a failure, Isabella, that he wasn't the greedy idiot everyone thought. And once I had the proof, I realized the man responsible had a son you were telling me you were in love with. Isabella looked like someone had knocked the wind out of her. You knew who he was when I brought him home? She whispered. Yes. And you didn't stop me. I tried. I said quietly. I asked you questions. I asked about his family. I told you we needed to talk about my past. You weren't ready to hear it. And I knew if I attacked him without showing you everything first, you would only run further into his arms. Tears pooled in her eyes. So you waited until my wedding day. She choked. You waited until today to show me this? I swallowed hard. Yes, I said. Because today was the day I knew you couldn't run anymore. Today, you had the right to know exactly whose name you were taking. Her lower lip trembled. She turned to Lucas. Did you know? She whispered. His silence was louder than any answer. Her eyes hardened. You knew, she said. From the beginning. Lucas's mask slipped just enough for me to see the guilt beneath. I knew your parents had history, he said carefully. I didn't know about those documents. I didn't know she still had them. I thought it was all over. Bella, it was years ago. We're not them. Then why, she held up one of the pages, the one with his signature on a more recent email attached at the back of the stack. Why is your name on this? Lucas's eyes flared. I watched the moment realization hit her face. Why is there a transfer from your private account into my father's old company file? She whispered. From just last year. The room around us faded into soft blur. Music, laughter, clinking glasses, all distant. At the bridal table, time stood still. She stared at him. The son of my enemy, the man she married. Lucas, she whispered, voice cracking. What did you do? For a heartbeat, Lucas didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. And in that stillness, I saw the truth. Not in his words, he hadn't spoken yet. Not in his posture, too controlled to read. But in his eyes, guilt doesn't scream. Guilt waits. It measures the room. It looks for exits. And Lucas Grant was scanning every mental exit he had. Isabella's hand slowly lowered, the page trembling between her fingers. She looked like she had just fallen through a trapdoor she never knew existed, free fall without a bottom. Lucas, she said again, voice barely a whisper. What did you do? He exhaled finally, leaning back slightly, like a man bracing for hard truth or crafting a softer lie. Bella, listen to me. He started quietly. Business is complicated. Money moves in ways. Answer the question, I said sharply. His jaw pulsed. I sent your father money, he said at last. Isabella recoiled. Why? He hesitated. Because my father asked me to. Her face crumpled. No, she whispered. No, that doesn't make sense. Why would he ask you to send money into my father's old company files? I could see Lucas calculating, not emotionally, but strategically, choosing which truth hurt least. He wanted to clean it up, he said finally. Tee loose ends. Make things right in a way that wouldn't cause trouble. Trouble? I echoed, my voice colder than I expected. Trouble like exposure, like accountability, like the public finding out that your father stole a company from a dying man. Lucas didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His silence confirmed everything. Isabella stared at the documents like they were venom. You sent money to the same shadow account your father used to drain my dad's company, she whispered. Lucas, that wasn't cleaning up. That was maintaining the lie. He finally snapped, frustration breaking through his polished composure. What was I supposed to do, Bella? He hissed in a low whisper. Let everything explode. Let lawyers dig everything up. Let my father's reputation burn. Let my family collapse. Do you understand what would happen if this came out? She stared at him, voice trembling. Do you understand what already happened? To mine. He flinched. For the first time since the wedding began, the charming groom vanished. The man sitting beside her now was simply a Grant, a product of the same empire that crushed us all those years ago. Bella, he said again, softer, almost pleading, I love you. That has nothing to do with the past. But you were a part of the past, she whispered. You made choices to protect your father, even if it meant hiding what he did to mine. Lucas's gaze hardened, desperation sinking into his tone. I did what any son would do. At that, Isabella froze, and slowly, painfully, her head turned toward me. Her eyes filled, not just with tears, but with something deeper, recognition. Because she realized something important. I had done what any mother would do. Protect her child, even if it meant facing an enemy at the altar. Mom, she whispered, voice breaking, how long have you known he was involved? Not just his father, but him. The truth sat heavy on my tongue. Only recently, I said gently, when I found that transfer, when I dug deeper, when I realized the son was helping the father keep the secret alive. Isabella put a shaking hand to her forehead and stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. The music in the hall swelled with a joyful chorus, completely at odds with the storm brewing at the bridal table. She stepped away from both of us, clutching the papers like they were burning her palms. What am I supposed to do? She whispered. Lucas stood too, reaching toward her. We'll handle it together. She jerked away before he could touch her. Don't you dare say together. Not after this. Bella, did you marry me? She whispered, because you loved me, or because you knew being we kept my mother quiet. His hesitation was so slight, so small, but it was there. And it sliced her open. I loved you, he said desperately. I married you because I wanted a life with you. The rest, the business stuff. Bella, it wasn't about you. I was cleaning up a mess I didn't create. You continued the mess, she cried. Her voice cracked through the hall, though the music covered it enough that only those near us turned. She pressed the papers against her chest, breathing hard. My heart ached for her. She had dreamed of fairy tales. She had believed in goodness. She had loved without hesitation. And now she saw the fracture, the blade hidden behind a wedding band. Lucas reached for her again. Bella, please, don't say my name again, she whispered. Not until I understand who you really are. He stopped, because he knew there was no answer that wouldn't shatter her. She backed away, step by trembling step, until she reached me. She collapsed into the chair beside me, head buried in her hands. Mum, she whispered, voice breaking into pieces. Everything's ruined. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. No, sweetheart, I murmured. Everything is just becoming clear. Her tears soaked my dress. My fingers stroked her hair the same way I did when she was little, when her nightmares woke her trembling, when she'd run into my room whispering, Mom, don't let go. I didn't let go then. I wasn't letting go now. After a long moment, she straightened, wiping her eyes. Her breaths came shaky, but steadier each time. Then she lifted the envelope again. You said this was your gift, she whispered. Why? Why today? I took her hand. Because you deserve to start your marriage, I said softly, with truth, not buried landmines. She trembled, absorbing the words. Lucas stood a few feet away now, hands half raised, helpless, uncertain whether stepping closer would heal or worsen the wound. What's in the last page? She asked. I exhaled deeply. That, I said, is the reason the war ends today. She turned the final page. Her breath caught. Lucas's face went white. He knew exactly what she was looking at. A document, not about the past, but about the future. Something the Grants never expected me to find. Something that ensured that from this moment forward, the power no longer belonged to them. Isabella stared at the final page, her eyes moving slowly, carefully, as if each line carried a weight heavy enough to bruise her. Her breathing hitched once, then again, Her fingers tightened around the paper until it wrinkled beneath her grip. "Mom," she whispered, voice thin as thread. "What is this?" Lucas reacted faster than she did. He lunged forward, not violently, but with a sudden desperation that revealed everything he'd been trying to hide. "Bella, give that to me." He hissed under his breath, his hand outstretched. "You don't understand what that is." But she stepped back, clutching the document to her chest. "No," she said sharply. "I'm done giving things up without understanding them." The groom froze. A few guests looked our way now, sensing the crack in the perfect wedding veneer. But the music and laughter kept most of them blissfully distracted. The world had not shifted for them yet, only for us. I rose slowly, placing myself between Isabella and the man she had just promised forever to. Her tear-stained face lifted toward mine. "What is it, Mom? Why does he look like that?" I exhaled, steadying myself. "That," I said softly, "is a pending lawsuit." Her brows pinched. "A lawsuit?" "Yes," I said, "filed by someone you haven't met yet, someone who has been collecting evidence against the Grant family for years. Someone your father trusted before he died?" Isabella's lips parted. "Dad, but he never said anything." "I couldn't," I whispered. "Your father died before the case could begin, but his business partner, Samuel Reed, kept fighting. He lost everything too, and he refused to let your father's name rot in the ground, while the Grants built empires on ashes." Isabella held her breath. "And now," I continued, "the lawsuit is ready. Every document, every forged signature, every misdirected transfer, every offshore account, everything." Lucas's eyes flared with naked panic. "Bella, listen, this has nothing to do with us." She shook her head slowly, disbelief and hurt twisting through her expression. "But your name is on the last amendment." "Lucas, why is your name there? Why are you listed as a secondary beneficiary of funds taken from my father's company?" He dragged a hand down his face. "Because I didn't know it was stolen. I didn't know what those accounts were. Dad just said to move the funds around to keep everything clean." "Don't," I said firmly, "don't hide behind ignorance. You had every resource to know exactly what those accounts were." He turned to me, jaw tight. "I didn't want to believe your version of the story. My father said yours was reckless. He said you were bitter. He said you were angry at the world and needed someone to blame. That's convenient," I replied quietly. "People who destroy livelihoods always rewrite history to paint themselves as heroes." Isabella looked between us, her world crumbling at the seams. "And this lawsuit," she whispered. "Mom, why did you give it to me now?" I met her gaze with all the softness I had saved for this exact moment. "Because the case names you," I said gently. "You and any future children." She blinked. "What? Why would it name me?" Lucas stiffened, he knew. "Because," I said, "the Grant family moved assets into your name last year. Assets that weren't legally theirs to give. And once you signed the marriage license today," her voice trembled, "they became mine." Yes. Everything inside her went still. Lucas stepped toward her, his voice soft, pleading. "Bella, please, I was going to tell you. I just needed more time." My father said. "You keep saying your father," she whispered. "But what did you say, Lucas? Did you ever once question him? Or did you just follow him blindly because you wanted the empire too?" He swallowed hard. "I never wanted the empire," he said quietly. "I wanted you." The sincerity in his voice hit her like a blow, but sincerity isn't innocence. And she knew that now. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. So all the dinners, all the visits to your family's estate, all those whispers between you and your father when you thought I wasn't listening. She stepped back, tears shimmering in her eyes. Were you talking about me? About what marrying me would do for your case? For your money? No, he said immediately. Bella, no. I love you. I didn't marry you for money. My father, he thought. What did he think? She asked, her voice breaking. That marrying me would silence my mother. That marrying me would legally bind me to the damage your family did. Lucas's breath stuttered. He didn't answer. He couldn't. And that was the answer. Isabella pressed the document against her chest, her shoulders shaking. I reached out, touching her hand. Sweetheart, I murmured, my gift today wasn't meant to ruin your wedding. It was meant to stop a future where you unknowingly became entangled in a crime your husband's family committed. She let out a soft, wounded sound, a sound no mother ever forgets. Then slowly she turned to me. Mom, she whispered. What do I do? Before I could respond, movement at the edge of my vision caught my attention. A tall, silver-haired man stepped into the hall from the side entrance. Sharp suit, measured steps, eyes that had seen more truth than comfort. Samuel Reed, the man who refused to let my husband's legacy die in lies. He walked toward us with purpose, ignoring the celebration around him. Lucas paled the second he saw him. Isabella, I said softly. That's Samuel. Your father's old partner. She looked at him with awe and misplaced grief. Mr. Reed stopped at our table and inclined his head toward me respectfully. I'm sorry to enter unannounced, he said quietly. But today is the deadline for filing the lawsuit. And your signature, he nodded at Isabella, is now legally required. The world held its breath. Lucas stepped forward sharply. No, she's not signing anything. Not today. Samuel's gaze slid to him, unbothered, unimpressed. You don't decide that, he said. She does. Isabella stared at the pen Samuel placed gently on the table. Her hand hovered over it, trembling, uncertain, ready. Lucas reached out, voice cracking with desperation. Bella, please, don't do this. She looked at him, really looked, at the man she thought she knew, at the truth that had unraveled before her, at the future she almost tied herself to blindly. And then, with a slow, heartbreaking steadiness, she picked up the pen. For a moment, the entire world shrank to the tiny space between Isabella's trembling hand and the pen she now held. Music still played. Guests still laughed. Glasses still clinked. But none of it belonged to us anymore. We were in a different reality, one where truth demanded answers and consequences stood waiting quietly in the eyes aisle like an uninvited guest. Isabella's breath shook as she turned the pen slowly in her fingers. Lucas watched her like a man watching the edge of a cliff crumble beneath his feet. Bella, he whispered, stepping closer, I love you. That's real. None of this changes that. She swallowed, her throat tight. But you knew, she whispered. You knew my father didn't lose everything because of a bad decision. You knew your family destroyed him. You knew we suffered. And you still let me walk into your life blind. I wasn't like that. He insisted desperately. I found out only a year ago. My father, he didn't tell me everything at first. I swear to you, Bella, I didn't know the full story until after you proposed, she asked, pain tightening her voice. He flinched. Her silence told him everything. You didn't tell me, she whispered, because you were afraid I'd leave you. Yes, he said immediately. Yes, I was terrified because I knew what we had was real and I didn't want the past to poison it. She stared at him long, hollow stare where love and betrayal twisted into something neither could name. And yet, she said quietly, "You protected the past instead of protecting me." He stepped forward again, voice cracking. "I was trying to protect us, Bella. You don't know how complicated." But she lifted a hand, stopping him. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make my father's suffering sound like a business inconvenience." The words hit him like a blow. Her eyes dropped to the documents again, scanning over the parts that shattered her world in slow, jagged pieces. I stepped closer to her. "Isabella," she blinked hard, tears gathering, but refusing to fall. "I don't know if I can forgive this," she whispered. I touched her shoulder gently. "You don't have to decide forgiveness today. Today isn't about choosing him. Today is about choosing yourself, your future, your name." She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something new was there, clarity, painful but bright. "Mr. Reed," she whispered, her voice trembling but steadying. "If I sign, what happens?" Samuel Reed stepped forward, his gaze not sharp, but filled with the quiet respect one gives someone who has just discovered their power. "If you sign," he said, "we file immediately. The lawsuit becomes publicly registered. Your father's name is cleared. The financial fraud is traced. The Grant empire faces investigation, and you are legally protected from being dragged into their defense." Isabella looked at Lucas. "And if I don't sign?" His expression softened, pleading. "If you don't sign," he said gently, "we still fix this. I promise you, Bella, I'll talk to my father. I'll make it right. I'll separate from his business. We'll build our own life. No lawsuits, no war. Just you and me." Her lips trembled. "Can you promise me," she whispered, "that none of this will follow us into the future? That the truth won't come out later and ruin everything again?" His silence was torturous because he couldn't promise what wasn't his to control. A lie would destroy him. The truth would expose him. Either way, he was trapped. Finally, he said softer than before, "Bella, I can promise I'll try." She inhaled sharply, tears spilling now. "I think," she whispered, "that's the problem. My father tried. He tried to trust. He tried to believe in someone who promised him safety. And he died with the weight of that mistake on his shoulders." She looked at me then. "I won't die repeating his story." Lucas reached for her hand one last time. "Bella," he said, voice breaking, "I need you." She stepped back. "No," she whispered. "You needed my silence." He froze. A lifetime of war ended in that single sentence. Her fingers tightened around the pen. And Lucas finally realized she wasn't signing because she hated him. She was signing because she loved herself more. With one breath, one heartbeat, one trembling motion, she lowered the pen to the line and signed her name. Lucas's breath left him like someone had pulled it out by force. The room around us continued celebrating, unaware that a dynasty had fallen in the corner of the hall. Samuel Reed reached forward, taking the signed page with reverence. "Your father would be proud of you," he said quietly. Isabella let out a shaky sob, covering her mouth. The weight of her signature hit her full force. The relief, the grief, the loss, the justice, all tangled together in a knot she couldn't untie. Lucas sank into a chair, his shoulders collapsing inward. The groom, who had walked into the room with charm and confidence, now looked like a man stripped of his armor, bare, shaken, undone. He rubbed his forehead. "Bella," he whispered, "we can still fix us. We can still." "No," she said, her voice steady now, even through tears. We can't fix anything built on lies. He looked up, eyes glossy. So, what does this mean? For us. She closed the envelope, sealing the truth inside it. It means, she whispered, or marriage starts with honesty. And if honesty breaks us, she swallowed. Then we were never meant to last. Her words sliced him. I saw it. I felt it. He loved her deeply. But love without truth rots faster than hate. Isabella sat down slowly, staring at her wedding ring, like she didn't recognize it anymore. Her fingers trembled as she traced the metal. Mom, she whispered, I don't know what to do next. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. You don't have to know today, I murmured. You just have to breathe. As she leaned into me, trembling but unbroken, Lucas rose slowly, his face pale and devastated. He looked one last time at the woman he had hoped would be his salvation. But she was not a shield, not a pawn, not a silencer. She was her father's daughter, and she had ended the war. The reception hall felt different now. Brighter lights, louder music, laughter echoing from every corner, yet somehow everything seemed wrapped in a muffled haze around us, as if the world had continued spinning while our small universe stood perfectly still. Isabella sat beside me, her makeup smudged, her gown wrinkled from shaking, her heart cracked in the center. But she didn't look broken. No, she looked sharpened, tempered by truth, hardened by the weight of realizing that love can be both a sanctuary and a battlefield. Lucas hovered a few steps away, unsure whether to leave, approach, or collapse. He ran a hand through his hair, his breath unsteady. Bella, he tried again, voice fragile. Can we talk privately? She didn't respond, not with words, not with movement. She simply lifted her eyes, red, swollen, exhausted, and stared at him with a quiet devastation that made even me pity him for a moment. He took that silence as permission and stepped closer, kneeling beside her chair. I didn't want this to happen on our wedding day. He whispered, I never wanted to hurt you. She looked straight into his eyes for the first time since signing. Then why did you hide the truth from me? He swallowed hard. Because I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the moment you chose protecting your father over protecting our future, she whispered. A dull throb passed across his face. His shoulders sagged, defeated. Bella, but Samuel Reed cleared his throat softly. Mr. Grant, he said, voice calm but firm, I suggest you keep your distance. For now, this young woman needs clarity, not persuasion. Lucas stood slowly, jaw tightening. And you think you can give her that? No, Samuel replied, but her mother can, her conscience can, and the truth can. The tension between them crackled like electricity. Guests finally seemed to notice something was wrong. Whispering circled the tables. Curious glances flicked toward us. A bridesmaid approached cautiously, but I caught her eye and shook my head. She read the situation instantly and backed away. Lucas took a shaky breath. Bella, I'm not my father, he said finally. I didn't build his empire. I didn't make his choices. No, she replied softly. But you defended them. He closed his eyes. That sentence broke him more than anything else. He stepped back, running his hand over his mouth. I just need time. He murmured. Time to explain. Time to fix. You've had years. She whispered. Years where you could have told me the truth. I didn't know how. You lie by omission the same way your father lies on paper. His breath caught. Bella. But she turned away, her tears silently falling again. Leave her alone. Lucas, I said quietly. Let her breathe. He stared at me, anger, guilt. sorrow all clashing behind his eyes. This wasn't just your story to weaponize. He snapped, voice low. You used her wedding day to destroy everything? I met his gaze, calm and unflinching. No, I said. I used her wedding day to save her from becoming another casualty of your family's schemes. His nostrils flared. Do you think my love for her was fake? No, I answered honestly. And that's the tragedy. For a moment, he didn't breathe. Then he looked at Isabella again, desperate, aching. I meant every word of my vows, he said quietly. But she shook her head. You should have meant every word of your honesty, too. He stepped back as if struck. The DJ announced the couple's first dance. The lights dimmed. Guests cheered. The music began, a soft ballad Isabella had chosen months ago. But the bride didn't stand. The groom didn't move. The dance floor remained empty, and slowly, painfully, the cheers faded into awkward murmurs. A guest whispered, "Is everything okay?" Another said, "Why aren't they dancing?" Another, "She looks upset. Go check." But before anyone could interfere, Samuel Reed gently placed a hand on the back of Isabella's chair. "My dear," he said softly, "you don't have to do anything today. Not dance. Not smile. Not pretend." She wiped her cheeks, breathing through her trembling. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. Truth writes its own next page. Lucas finally spoke, voice hollow. "Bella, please, just tell me you don't hate me." She looked up, eyes shimmering. "I don't hate you," she whispered, "but I can't trust you." He shut his eyes, agony pulling at every muscle in his face. Then, without another word, he stepped back. Then another. Then another. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply walked away. Not out of the building, but far enough to give her the distance she needed to breathe again. Isabella inhaled shakily, placing the pen down as though it weighed more than her wedding ring. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm scared." I pulled her into my arms, rocking her gently. "I know," I whispered against her hair, "but fear means you're alive, and being alive means you still get to choose." She looked up at me, the girl I raised, the woman she'd become, and the child inside her who still needed to be held. "What if this ruins everything?" she whispered. I brushed her cheek. Then everything needed to be rebuilt. A soft sob escaped her lips, but this time it wasn't from helplessness. It was from awakening. Samuel Reed cleared his throat softly. "We don't have to file today if she isn't ready." Isabella shook her head. "No," she whispered. "File it." He nodded, collecting the documents with reverence. And in that moment, the war that had begun with betrayal, loss, and silence ended with her signature. Not mine, not Samuel's, not even Lucas's, hers, because this wasn't my revenge. It was her justice. And justice, once awakened, never returns to sleep. After Samuel Reed walked away with the signed documents, a hush settled over the bridal table. Not the calm kind, but the fragile, trembling silence that follows a storm too heavy for words. Isabella stared at the empty space where her husband had stood moments before, as if trying to understand how a love story could shift into a battlefield in less than an hour. The reception continued around us, oblivious. Guests were laughing, taking photos, nibbling desserts, but their joy felt distant, muted, like it belonged to a world we were no longer part of. "Mom," Isabella whispered, her fingers picking nervously at her gown. "Everyone is watching. They're watching a woman stand up for herself," I said softly. "Let them." She swallowed hard, eyes glassy. "I don't feel brave." Bravery isn't something you feel, I whispered. It's something you do anyway. Before she could answer, Lucas returned, not with anger this time, nor desperation, but something different. His shoulders were hunched, his tie loosened, and his expression was a mix of shame and something deeper, a quiet fear. He approached slowly, as though every step might shatter what little remained. Bella, he said quietly, stopping at a respectful distance. Can I speak to you now? She tensed. I squeezed her hand. I'll be right here. She nodded once, then stood. Lucas gestured toward a quieter corner of the hall near the window, far from curious guests. Isabella followed him there with hesitant steps, her gown whispering behind her. I stayed seated, watching silently, my heart tightening for a daughter caught between love and truth. From across the room, I saw Lucas inhale deeply before speaking. His gestures were small, gentle, careful, like a man trying to rebuild a bridge whose foundation he never inspected in the first place. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the shape of the pain. He spoke. She blinked. He reached. She recoiled. He lowered his hand. She lowered her gaze. And then, to my utter surprise, Lucas sank to his knees in front of her, not in romantic gesture, not in plea, but in surrender. He bowed his head, covering his face with his hands. Guests began to notice, if only because a groom kneeling before a bride in silence is not something people ignore. A ripple moved through the room, whispers blooming like storm clouds across the tables. I remained still, silent, observing, guarding. Moments later, Isabella gently touched his shoulder, urging him to stand. She didn't embrace him. She didn't step back to her chair. She simply stood there, looking at him with eyes full of questions that love alone could no longer answer. When they returned to the table, Lucas's face looked drawn, his expression haunted. Mrs. Hale, he said quietly, addressing me for the first time that day. May I sit? I hesitated. This was a man who carried not only his father's sins, but now his own guilt. Yet the way he looked at Isabella, it wasn't manipulation. Not anymore. It was remorse, raw and unpolished. Yes, I said finally. Sit. He lowered himself slowly, like a man exhausted from fighting battles he had never prepared for. Isabella sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. I don't expect forgiveness, he said softly, but I need to tell the truth. Isabella lifted her chin slightly, bracing herself. I knew, he admitted, voice trembling. I knew my father destroyed your family. I didn't understand every detail, but I knew enough. And I loved you too much to risk losing you. Her breath hitched. He continued, words spilling like confession. When I asked you to marry me, it wasn't to hide the truth. It was because I thought if I built a new life with you, our pasts wouldn't matter. I thought I could outrun what my family did. I thought I could shield you from it. He swallowed. But I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd see me the way you see him. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then Isabella whispered, Lucas, I don't see you as your father. Hope flickered in his eyes. But she added gently, I can't pretend your choices didn't hurt me. He nodded, defeated but listening. Isabella turned the pages in the envelope with a trembling hand. This lawsuit will destroy your father's empire. I know, he whispered. And it might destroy your relationship with him. He smiled sadly. That relationship was built on fear, not love. Maybe it should have been destroyed a long time ago. Her lips parted, but before she could respond, the hall lights dimmed again, signaling it was time for speeches. A bridesmaid approached the DJ, whispering frantically while pointing toward our table. The poor DJ froze, unsure whether to continue with the wedding schedule or stop out of respect for the emotional meltdown clearly happening in the bridal party. Suddenly, a microphone squealed. A man at a nearby table raised it shakily. If the bride and groom would like to come to the dance floor. No, Isabella said softly but firmly. The DJ nearly fainted. She stood looking at Lucas. Come with me, she said. He blinked. Where? Outside. I felt my chest tighten. They walked together toward the venue doors, not touching, not smiling. Two people in wedding clothes, walking into a night colder than their vows had predicted. I followed them from a distance, not close enough to intrude, but close enough to protect my daughter if she needed me. The air outside was crisp, scented with pine and distant rain. Lanterns hung from trees, their warm glow flickering across the courtyard. Isabella stopped beneath the archway where hours earlier she and Lucas had exchanged rings. Now it looked like a different world altogether. She turned to him. Lucas, she whispered, do you want to stay married to me? His answer was instant. Yes. But do you want to stay married to me? She continued, knowing that I will not protect your father or defend his legacy or hide anything that comes next. He hesitated only for a moment, but it was long enough. Her heart cracked visibly. I can't spend my life married to hesitation, she whispered. He stepped forward quickly. Bella, she held up her hand. No. Listen, he froze. If you want this marriage, she said, voice trembling but steady, then you fight for the truth with me. Not against me, not around me, with me. His jaw trembled. And if you can't, she whispered, then we end this before it destroys both of us. The lantern light flickered, catching the tears gathering in Lucas's eyes. He had a choice now. Not the one his father crafted. Not the one fear dictated. Not the one silence allowed. For the first time in his life, he had to choose the side of truth. For a moment, neither of them moved. The courtyard was still, too still, as if even the wind held its breath, waiting to hear which way Lucas Grant would fall. The lanterns cast soft halos of gold on their faces, but nothing about the scene felt warm. Isabella stood tall in her wedding gown, the lace trembling with each sharp breath she took. Lucas stood opposite her, shoulders tense, the crisp lines of his tuxedo looking strangely out of place on a man whose world was unraveling thread by thread. He wiped a hand across his mouth, eyes shifting away, searching for words that didn't exist. Bella, he began slowly. I want you. I want us. I never lied about that. But you lied about everything around it. She whispered, that's not fair. She flinched. Fair. Lucas, my father, died believing he was a failure, believing he ruined us. And all that time, your family walked away richer, stronger, untouched. He closed his eyes. I wasn't part of that, he whispered. But you are now? She replied gently, painfully. Because you chose silence. He opened his eyes, jaw tight. What was I supposed to do? Betray my father? Turn my back on my family's legacy? Yes, she said simply. If that legacy was built on theft and lies, yes. He stared at her, breathing shallowly. You don't understand what it means to be a Grant, he said, despair creeping into his voice. My whole life, my father told me loyalty was everything. Loyalty above doubt, above comfort, above truth. Isabella stepped closer, though her voice stayed soft and wounded. And what about loyalty to me? Lucas swallowed hard. That's what I'm trying to figure out, he admitted. Because being your husband, it feels right. More right than anything I've ever had. But going against my father, he hesitated again. And that hesitation was a blade. Isabella backed up a slow step, as if the ground beneath her was quietly withdrawing its support. You still don't get it? She whispered, tears gathering again. My mother didn't ask for revenge. I didn't ask for revenge. All we wanted was truth, a clean slate, a chance to start our lives without ghosts. He rubbed his forehead. Your mom handed you a lawsuit that will destroy everything I've ever known. She shook her head. My mom gave me the truth. What I do with it is my choice. Lucas's breath hitched. But your choice destroys me. No, she murmured. Your father destroyed you long before today. I'm just the first person who refused to pretend it didn't happen. His expression broke. A crack, sharp, real, painful, cut straight through the mask he'd always worn so naturally. He looked suddenly younger, smaller, like a scared boy trying desperately to protect the version of life he was raised to believe in. Bella. His voice fractured. I don't know how to undo any of this. Then start, she whispered, by choosing who you want to be from this moment forward. He stared at her, really stared, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The woman who loved him enough to marry him. The woman he had hurt by omission. The woman who had the courage to stand against an empire. A faint tremor moved across his lips. If I go against my father, he whispered, he will disown me. And if you stay with him, she replied softly, you will lose me. The truth hung between them, raw, simple, devastating. He looked down at his wedding ring, twisting it with trembling fingers. All my life, he said quietly, I thought loyalty meant silence, obedience, carrying the weight of someone else's decisions. He looked up, eyes glistening. But today, I realized loyalty might also mean telling the truth even if it hurts. Isabella held her breath. Lucas took a step toward her. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. So, tell me what to do. Tell me how to make this right. No, she said gently. I can't tell you how to be a good man. You have to decide that yourself. He looked shattered. And yet something inside him shifted. A seed turned in soil. A crack widened to let light through. They stood there quietly for several seconds, neither reaching for the other. Then Lucas did something completely unexpected. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, tapped, and then handed it to Isabella. On the screen was a message thread with Richard Grant. He opened the latest message. It read, Dad, I'm done covering for this. If the documents are real, we need to come clean before Bella finds out. Isabella's breath caught. The next message, one sent earlier that morning, said, Dad, we can't let this follow us into the wedding. Please tell me everything before it's too late. She scrolled. Another, Bella deserves honesty. And finally, a message Lucas had drafted but never sent. I can't carry this lie anymore. Isabella's fingers trembled around the phone. Why didn't you send these? Lucas's voice was low, ashamed. Because I was afraid. Because my father raised me to believe that telling the truth was weakness. He paused. But meeting you taught me the opposite. She lifted her gaze slowly. He swallowed, stepping closer. I was wrong, he whispered. And if I have any chance of being worthy of you, I'm going to prove it. Not with words. He looked toward the hall, but with action. Her voice cracked. Lucas, he shook his head. You don't have to decide anything today, he said gently. But I know what I choose. She waited. I choose the truth, he whispered, even if it ruins me. A single tear slipped down her cheek. He brushed it away carefully, slowly, without assuming forgiveness, without asking for anything more. Just touching her with the reverence of a man who finally understood the weight of what he almost lost. Whatever you decide next, he murmured, I won't run. She exhaled shakily, her shoulders trembling beneath the weight of her newly claimed independence. And slowly, very slowly, she took his hand, not as a gesture of acceptance, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement that the war between families had reached a moment of truce. Uncertain, delicate, real. In the quiet glow of lantern light under the arch where they had exchanged vows just hours before, something shifted. Not reconciliation, but possibility. A fragile, trembling chance. And sometimes a chance is all a story needs to begin rewriting itself. When the two of them returned inside, their hands weren't intertwined the way newlyweds usually walked in, no soft smiles, no glowing aura of celebration. Instead, their fingers barely touched, a fragile thread connecting two hearts that had just collided with a truth sharp enough to tear them apart. The guest sensed it instantly. A hush fell over the nearest tables. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations faded. Even the band slowed, uncertain whether to continue playing something joyful in a room suddenly thick with tension. But Isabella didn't look at them. She didn't look at the flowers she had chosen, the decor she had spent months planning, or the cake she had dreamed of since childhood. She looked only at me. Her eyes, those same eyes I watched grow from infancy, carried a question she wasn't ready to ask out loud. Mom, what now? I stood slowly, my chest tightening with a mixture of pride and pain. Now, I said softly, we breathe, and then we move. Lucas lingered behind her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't smiling through it. He wasn't performing. For the first time since he walked into our lives, he looked like a man stripped down to his rawest truth, afraid, humbled, unsure. Before any of us could take another step, the main door swung open, and he walked in. Richard Grant. Tall, impeccably dressed, eyes cold enough to freeze oceans. A man who carried arrogance like a second skin. The father who built an empire on other people's losses and taught his son silence as a virtue. The moment he stepped into the reception hall, the temperature dipped. Even the chatter that had begun to stir died instantly, swallowed by the weight of his presence. His gaze swept the room, sharp as a blade. Then he saw Isabella clutching the envelope. Lucas, pale beside her. Samuel Reed standing nearby with documents in hand. Me watching him with a calm I didn't feel. He understood everything in one heartbeat, and fury flared behind his eyes. He strode across the floor, each step loud enough to command attention. Guests parted instinctively, the way people move aside for storms they've learned not to stand in front of. Lucas, he snapped, not bothering to disguise the anger twisting his voice. What have you done? Lucas didn't flinch this time. The truth is out. Richard's gaze turned venomous. I told you to handle this, to keep things contained. And you. I'm not covering for you anymore, Dad, Lucas said, voice shaking but firm. The room fell silent. Richard's jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. We will talk outside. No, Lucas replied quietly. We'll talk here, in front of the people who deserve to know. Richard's eyes darted to the envelope in Isabella's hands. Her bouquet had been replaced with a weapon made of paper and ink, deadly enough to bring down his kingdom. You? He hissed, turning to her. You think you understand what you're holding? You're a child manipulated by your mother, manipulated by a bitter old man who, Mr. Grant. Samuel Reed stepped forward, voice calm, almost polite. Choose your next words wisely. Richard sneered. Samuel, of course you slithered back for this. I should have known you were involved. You should have known a lot of things. Samuel replied, starting with the fact that the truth has a way of resurfacing, especially when you bury it poorly. Gas rippled through the room. Someone whispered, is this real? Another murmured, what's happening? But none of their voices mattered. Richard turned back to Isabella, lowering his tone, trying to reclaim the control slipping through his fingers. Bella, he said, using her nickname like a weapon, you have no idea what your signature has triggered. Companies fall. Employees lose jobs. Stockholders panic. Lawyers bleed everyone dry. Do you understand the consequences of your childish decision? Isabella lifted her chin, a small, trembling act of bravery. My father already paid the consequences, she said softly. This time, your family does. Richard stiffened. You foolish girl, he spat. Do you think Lucas will stay by your side when you drag him into ruin? Do you think he'll forgive you once everything collapses? Isabella flinched, but didn't break. Lucas stepped in front of her, blocking his father's words like a shield he should have held long ago. Dad, he said, voice low but steady, if anything collapses, it's because you built it rotten. A murmur swept the room. Richard froze, shock flickering across his features, shock that his son had finally stepped out of the shadows he forced him to live in. You ungrateful. No. Lucas held up a hand. This ends today, all of it. The lies, the manipulation, the threats. I'm done. Richard's face twisted in a rage, so cold it made my skin crawl. You would throw away your family, he snarled, for these people. Lucas glanced at Isabella, then at me, then at the documents. I'm choosing the truth, he said quietly. For the first time in my life. Richard's jaw dropped open, less from anger, more from disbelief that his obedient son, his carefully groomed successor, had finally broken away. You have no idea what you've done, Richard whispered. You've destroyed everything? For a heartbeat, for one fragile moment, Lucas looked like that terrified boy again, but then he exhaled. I know, he said, but maybe it needed to be destroyed. Richard took a step forward, fury ready to strike, but Samuel placed a hand between them. Mr. Grant, your threats will serve you poorly in court. Richard shot him a look of venom. Then he turned his eyes to Isabella, dark, bitter, hateful. This isn't over, he hissed. She held the envelope tighter. Yes, she whispered, it is. And with that, Richard Grant turned sharply and stormed out of the reception hall, his empire beginning to crumble the moment the doors slammed behind him. Silence held the room. Then slowly, carefully, Isabella reached for Lucas's hand again. Not with love, not with reconciliation, but with compassion, because she saw in that moment the price he paid to step out of his father's shadow, and she knew whatever their marriage would become from this moment forward, it would be built on truth, not legacy, not silence, not fear. Truth. Fragile, painful. And finally theirs. The hall didn't erupt into applause. No one cheered. No celebratory music resumed. Instead, an uneasy quiet lingered in the air, as though every soul in the room understood they had just witnessed the breaking of a dynasty and the trembling birth of something new. Isabella's fingers loosened around Lucas's hand, but she didn't let go completely. Not yet. Her face was pale beneath the soft reception lights, her lashes damp with fading tears. Lucas stood beside her, shoulders slumped. Looking like a soldier who had fought a war he never wanted to fight and wasn't sure if victory meant survival or ruin. The guests shifted awkwardly, as if debating whether to stay or quietly slip out. A bridesmaid stepped forward to hug Isabella, but stopped halfway, uncertain if comfort would soothe or reopen wounds. The DJ hovered near his equipment, looking like he wanted to crawl out the nearest window. I approached them slowly, the mother in me desperate to wrap my daughter in my arms, the woman in me recognizing she needed something else first, space to breathe, to absorb, to decide. "Bella?" I whispered, touching her arm gently. "Let's step outside for a moment." She nodded, grateful for the escape. Lucas didn't move at first. Then, hesitantly, he followed, but stopped near the doorway, waiting to see if she wanted him with her. She didn't tell him to stay behind, but she didn't ask him to come either. We walked out into the cooler night air. The courtyard lights glowed softer than before, the hum of insects rising gently from the garden. Everything looked the same, yet entirely changed, as if the wedding venue itself felt the shift in energy. Isabella hugged herself, rubbing her arms lightly. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What am I supposed to do now?" I exhaled, steadying my heart. "You don't have to decide tonight." She nodded, but frustration tightened her jaw. "Everyone expects me to have an answer. Lucas, the guests, his father, even you." I touched her cheek gently. "The only expectation that matters is your own." She took a shaky breath. "I don't know how to feel. Part of me still loves him, and part of me hates that I still love him. That's normal," I said softly. "Love doesn't disappear when the truth appears. It changes shape, sometimes gentler, sometimes sharper." Isabella leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was small. "I didn't want to ruin anyone's life," she whispered. "I just wanted the truth." "You didn't ruin anything," I replied. "You revealed what was already broken." We stood there quietly, the night embracing us. After a moment, footsteps approached behind us. Lucas. He came to a careful stop a few feet away, his voice low, stripped of its usual confidence. "Mrs. Hail Bella, may I say something?" Isabella straightened but didn't turn fully. I stepped aside slightly, not pushing them together, but creating room. Lucas swallowed visibly before speaking. "I know tonight wasn't the wedding either of us imagined," he said quietly. "I know I caused pain I can't take back, and I know choosing the truth now won't erase the years I stayed silent." He took a slow breath. "But I meant what I said. I'm not running. Not from this. Not from you." Isabella's breath hitched, but she remained still. Lucas continued, each word sounding like it had been weighed, contemplated, and placed with intention. "My father built an empire by tearing people down, by lying, manipulating, controlling." His voice cracked faintly. "I spent my whole life terrified of becoming him." He looked at Isabella then, not pleading, but honest. "You're the first person who ever made me want to be different." Her eyes softened, though she didn't move. "But," he added painfully, "I also know I don't deserve your forgiveness, just because I finally did the right thing today. That was my responsibility, not a gift to you." A tear slipped down Isabella's cheek. Lucas stepped back a little, giving her space. "So, if you need time, I'll wait. If you need distance, I'll give it. If you need this marriage to end, I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." Her shoulders trembled. "But if," he swallowed hard, "if there is even the smallest part of you that believes we could start again, not from a lie, but from truth. Then I will spend every day proving I choose you over everything I was taught to worship. The night held its breath again. Finally, Isabella turned to face him fully. Lucas, she whispered, do you understand what rebuilding takes? He nodded. Everything. And do you understand that you may still lose your father forever? He lowered his gaze. I already did. I just didn't realize it until tonight. Isabella's chest rose and fell with a deep, shaky inhale. She stepped closer, not enough to embrace him, but enough that he dared to look hopeful. I don't know what comes next, she said honestly. I don't know if I can trust you again. Not yet. Lucas nodded, accepting it. But, she added softly, I saw you stand up to him. And I saw the boy who was raised in fear become a man tonight. He blinked hard, tears forming. So for now, she whispered, I'm not ending anything. His breath shuddered out of him, relief flooding his face. But I'm not promising anything either. He nodded again. I understand. Silence settled between them, gentle this time. Not empty, not hostile, just real. Isabella took a step back and looked at me. Mom, she said quietly, I'd like to go home. Away from all this. Lucas's face flickered with worry, but she touched his arm lightly. We'll both need rest. Tomorrow we'll talk. He nodded, accepting the boundary with quiet respect. I took Isabella's hand. As we headed toward the exit, Lucas whispered behind us, Thank you for giving me a chance to be better. Isabella didn't turn, but I saw the answer in her eyes. Hope, fragile, trembling, alive. And for the first time since stepping into this war, I felt something lift inside me. Maybe this marriage wasn't doomed. Maybe this truth, painful as it was, wasn't an ending, but the beginning of something honest, something earned, something real. The next morning arrived not with clarity, but with a quiet heaviness, kind of emotional fog that settles after storms no one was prepared for. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of our living room, brushing Isabella's face in soft gold as she sat curled on the couch, blanket around her shoulders like armor. She hadn't slept much. Neither had I. She stared at her wedding ring, not with regret, but with contemplation. Turning it slowly, watching how the light bent around the metal, as though searching for meaning inside something too small to hold all the weight of the previous day. I always thought marriage began with certainty, she murmured. But mine started with choosing between truth and love. I sat beside her, close enough for comfort, but far enough for breath. Maybe? I whispered, your marriage began with choosing yourself. Her eyes shimmered with quiet gratitude, but her voice remained low. I don't want to build a life on broken pieces. You won't? I assured her. Not if both of you learn how to rebuild instead of pretending nothing cracked. She exhaled, tension melting slightly. A soft knock sounded at the door. Isabella froze. Mom, if it's him, I don't know if I'm ready. You don't have to be, I said gently. I opened the door expecting nerves, tension, maybe even Lucas. It wasn't him. It was Richard's wife, Lucas's mother, Grace Grant, a woman I had only seen from a distance at company events years ago. Silk blouse, pearl earrings, beauty cold as marble. A woman sculpted by expensive decorum and a lifetime of being spoken over by a husband who believed volume equaled power. But today, she looked human. Her eyes were swollen, her hair slightly out of place, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief as though it were the only thing holding her together. Mrs. Hale, she whispered, may I come in? I hesitated, not from mistrust, but from surprise. Of course. When she stepped inside and saw Isabella on the couch, her composure cracked like thin ice beneath sudden weight. Oh, sweetheart, she breathed, her voice trembling. I am so sorry. Isabella stiffened. Why are you here? Grace swallowed. Because my husband spent years teaching my son that silence was loyalty. Her voice broke. I allowed it. I let Richard shape him into someone who feared the truth. And now you're both paying for it. Isabella blinked, startled. Grace stepped closer, not imposing, not forceful, but fragile. Lucas didn't tell you the full story, she whispered. But I need you to know it. I exchanged a cautious look with Isabella. Grace continued, her voice barely above a breath. The first time Lucas questioned his father's business practices, he was 12. Richard slapped him so hard he couldn't eat for a day. Tears welled. The first time he tried to refuse signing a document he didn't understand, Richard locked him in his office for hours until he agreed. She swallowed painfully. Lucas grew up believing obedience was survival. Isabella's fingers went still around her blanket. Grace wiped her cheek shakily. He loves you, not as a shield or a prize, but because for the first time in his life, he met someone who didn't want anything from him except honesty. And he was terrified he'd lose you if he told you the truth. The room grew impossibly still. Isabella whispered, "Why didn't he tell me any of this?" "Because shame," Grace murmured, "is heavier than fear." Isabella closed her eyes, a tremor passing through her. "And Richard?" I asked quietly. Grace's lips trembled. "He's packing a suitcase. He plans to leave town until his lawyers repair the damage." She shook her head faintly. "But he won't be able to hide from this." "Does Lucas know?" Isabella asked. Grace nodded. "He's at the house. He didn't sleep either." Her voice softened. "He thinks you won't want to see him again." Isabella looked at her ring, at her hands, at the morning light painting her future in muted gold. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. Grace stepped forward with hesitant courage. "Then," she said softly, "let him show you what he wants." Silence followed, not oppressive, but contemplative. Finally, Isabella stood. She folded the blanket neatly, placed it on the couch, and straightened her posture. "Mom," she said gently, "will you drive me?" I nodded. Grace released a breath she'd been holding. When we arrived at the Grant estate, Lucas sat on the step side, still wearing the same rumpled shirt from the night before. Not glamorous, not powerful, not polished, just human. His head lifted the moment Isabella stepped out of the car. Relief flooded his face, relief so intense it softened every line of worry etched into him. He didn't run to her. He didn't reach for her. He simply stood, letting her decide the distance. Isabella approached him slowly, then stopped just a breath away. "Lucas," she said softly, "we can't erase what happened. I know. And things won't be easy. I know. And I'm still hurt. I know," he whispered again. She inhaled deeply. "But I think love deserves a chance when truth finally shows up," his breath caught. "So," she murmured, "if you're willing to rebuild from the beginning, one true brick at a time." He stepped closer, eyes shining. "I'll build whatever you want," he whispered, "as long as it's with you." The wind shifted gently. The sunlight warmed their faces. And for the first time since this war began, I saw peace bloom, not in victory, not in vengeance, but in choice, their choice, truth's choice, love's choice.